Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the David Watson podcast. Today, I spoke to Aaron, also, or better known perhaps, as the Mofo Mechanic, an absolute legend when it comes to tackling a lot of the bullshit going on in the health industry. I first got to know him on social media, and I love his content. I love the way he explains injuries and recovery, and he's so passionate about his work, and he puts his money where his mouth is. He proves, and he's happy to go out there and debate with other people. And funnily enough, so far, no one's wanted to join him on those debates. But we had a great conversation. I hope you enjoyed listening to it as much as I enjoyed listening to Aaron. It was brilliant. Thank you. Good evening. Welcome to the David Watson podcast. Thank you for coming on. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you, David. Very good indeed. We had a little bit of dialogue off air, didn't we?
We had, yeah. Just to give people context, we suddenly realised after 10 minutes of talking, we should start the podcast and start recording what we're talking about. And
I think there's a danger we're just going to end up just talking and talking. This hour is going to start to morph into 3 hours if we're not careful.
It is. So we're going to start straight off the bat with vibram finger and discuss. So what I'm going to put in is some caveats first as to why I had them or have them. And they're actually probably close to 10 years old. So I had them a long time and have mixed feelings about them. So one thing that they've been useful for over the years is when I've gone abroad to other countries surfing and I've got to walk across rocks.
Yeah.
They're brilliant for surfing, right? So
I find they're a really good form of contraception as well, because when you're wearing them, nobody wants to come near you.
And when was it? I think it was about 2016. I rolled my ankle really badly running, and it was a proper fucker. One of those ones where, because I used to like running with no headphones, no phone, no nothing, and I was about 1.5 miles from home. Went down a sort of pothole. Actually, pretty much, I didn't break anything, but I pretty much shattered all the ligaments in my ankle, and had 1.5 miles walk home in tears because I was in that much pain. And when I eventually got back to training, I had a really bad ankle, and when I started wearing them, it stopped. But that might have also coincided with a better awareness of mobility drills and balance drills, which happened at the same time. So it might not have been down to the shoes.
Yeah, I mean, I think with your ankle, my take on that would be, so the vast majority of people, when you see people training in trainers in the gym, if you think about the interface between your foot and the floor, you've got probably like an inch of rubber, which when you're weight bearing through it, provides a degree of shock absorption. But when you've got weight on your back, it creates almost like a portable wobble board. Like your trainer becomes like a wobble board. So I think for people who've got ankle sprains and have got ankle instability as a result of those ankle sprains, what your trainers are doing is actually creating an unstable surface to lift from. And I think where the Vibrams probably came in, or the barefoot shoes came in, I think is more about stability. So it's reducing the perturbation, it's reducing that movement in the ankle, and therefore the irritation on the ligaments.
Yeah, because I think what was useful for them is, because I was trying to focus on, I've hurt my ankle, I need to repair it.
Yeah.
And that these ones particularly have a really thin sole, even
they do.
A barefoot one. So I could literally feel the lumps in the gym floor.
Yeah.
And I think they really are, those ones at least, are like bare feet. And it's
like wearing a condom over your foot, isn't it?
It is,
That's that little material between your foot and the floor.
Yeah. So when I would do things like just try and brace my feet on the floor and sort of like twist and
screw your feet into the floor,
and all of that. That was where the awareness came from, and why they didn't hurt compared to trainers.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that, when I criticise barefoot footwear, it's not the actual footwear. I think in some circumstances, I think they're very useful. I think what I'm criticising is this misguided belief from a lot of coaches who advocate that everybody wears Vibrams because they're the panacea that cures all ills. I think it's those blanket approaches that I think where the footwear falls down. I think as a foot, ideally, your foot needs to be in a trainer where you can create a tripod. So if you think of if my hand shut your foot, that's the big toe, if that's the little toe, and if that's the heel, essentially there should be an equal amount of weight distribution across those 3 points in the foot. That's because that's due to loading through the ankle, loading through the knee, loading through the hips, loading through the back. And I think sometimes when people put some of the trainers on that they use in the gym, the toe boxes are very narrow. And as a result of the toe box being narrow, they can't create that tripod foot.
Yeah.
So therefore, they start to weight bear more onto the outside or more onto the big toe or more onto the heel. And I think it's those situations where maybe Vibrams become quite useful because they've got a wide toe box. I think if you could find a trainer that had a similar shaped toe box, maybe not with the 5 fingers, but some of the Vivo ones, the toe boxes are very wide. If you could create that in a trainer with a minimalist heel, I think you'd probably have exactly the same situation, or you'd find exactly the same effect in terms of your connection with movements and your connection with exercises. I think it's just, that post in particular was prompted by a coach advocating, he was basically telling all his athletes to wear Vibrams. Not that he's sponsored by Vibram, to my knowledge. And interestingly, of a number of his clients who were in barefoot shoes, a couple are having to have MRI scans on their knees because the barefoot shoe wasn't supporting the inside of the knee. It was actually causing them to collapse more inwards, which was exacerbating their current injury. So it was more about, like I say, it's not so much the shoe per se. I do think there's a lot to be said for barefoot. In fact, when I left basic training in the forces, I had the world's worst shin splints.
Yeah.
I didn't really know much about running at this point in time, other than the fact that you just had to run a lot in the forces.
A lot.
Yeah, an awful lot in boots and in that. So when I got to trade training, I had horrific shin splints. Like I couldn't even tolerate the weight of the sheet of my bed on my chins. They were that sore. I'm sure I probably had stress fractures, but you take some Brufen and you just push on because that's what you do.
Because you've been told to.
Because you've been told to, absolutely. And when I got to my trade training, for some reason, this is back in the 90s, before the barefoot movement really became a thing. I decided I was going to take my shoes and socks off and I was going to run across the station sports field. Unlike the park, where there's probably needles and dog shit and all sorts of stuff, the station sports field was like it was like they paint it green when the Queen visits.
Yeah. I'm very familiar with that.
So I ran across the station sports field barefoot. I realised that I didn't heel strike when I was running barefoot. So I then changed the way that I ran when I put my trainers back on, so that I adopted more of a midfoot striking stance. And within 2 weeks, my shin splints are gone.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of times when you get lower limb injuries, it's partly down to the fact that shoes are foot coffins and that they switch all the muscles off in your feet. So your muscles in your feet, you've got 4 layers of muscle, the intrinsic muscles of your feet. So as your muscles in your feet get weaker, your arch starts to flatten. And your arch is like a shock absorber. The idea of your arch in your foot is it dissipates force. So I think there's number one, the barefoot shoes probably wake your muscles up a bit and make your feet a bit more reactive and less sleepy, less dead-like. And I think number two, it changes your gait mechanics, so it stops you from doing the things that cause huge ground reaction forces, which then cause problems upstream in the ankles or the knees or the hips or the back.
Well,
so
funnily enough,
just to clarify, I don't actually hate Vibrams.
Yeah.
I hate that this blanket approach from people where they say everybody should wear Vibrams because they're gonna cure the sick. And
funnily enough, it never fixed my flat foot and my right foot. Never touched it.
No,
never changed a single thing.
Yeah.
And that could be because I've broken one of the long toe in there. but it never affected that at all. And like as much as I have a pair, I don't wear them that often these days because my garden is in the gym. My gym is in my garden now, so
Yeah,
they're not. But my thing with them has always been, what is it you think they're going to cure
yeah,
before you go and buy
yeah,
any trainer? If you
yeah.
think I need a specific trainer for this, what is it you think that specific trainer is going to fill? What role is it going
Yeah,
to take
and
on
I
for
think
you?
when people say to me, "What's a good pair of trainers to train in?" I think, well, a good pair of trainers is a pair of trainers that allows you to create your tripod foot
Yeah,
in the trainer, whether that's Metcons, Vibrams, Vivos, whichever brand of trainer you choose to use. That has to be driven by your foot shape and whether you can kind of create that tripod foot, that equal distribution of weight across the foot. So yeah, so I think Vibrams and the whole barefoot movement, I think you have to transition very slowly into barefoot. I think the other mistake people make is they go from wearing an inch heel wedge on their trainers to all of a sudden wearing almost no heel wedge, like a condom on the foot. And your heel cord, your Achilles tendon, well, that just thinks, fuck off, I'm not doing that.
yeah.
And then you start developing Achilles tendon problems and, the whole kind of windlass mechanism, the bottom of your foot, the calf, all that starts to become problematic. And I think that's the danger of just people listening to this kind of rote advice that's spewed on social media and various other social media platforms.
Well, that's one of the things that I actually love about your channel, and one of the reasons I always share your posts because there is so many things that have just become. Somebody mentioned it on a podcast. It was somebody famous, or
Yeah,
the latest fad. Just and all credit to your wife Danielle for doing the videos because
yeah.
they are
Oh, she
brilliant.
makes me look good. I'm
Yeah,
I'm, I'm an absolute. I'm a moron in front of a camera normally. She makes me look like I'm remotely intelligent.
but it is the fact you're saying, look, that's not how this works. It just can't work like that because that's not
Yeah,
how the body works. And like you were
yeah,
saying with the barefoot movement, there's nothing wrong with it. But what you're trying to
yeah,
do is get
yeah,
a tripod in your feet. That's all you're
yeah,
trying to do, and that doesn't matter if you put a plank of wood on your foot or 6 inches of sponge. If the
yeah.
tripod's there, it's there.
And I think the thing we got to remember is that we've gone from running on the shifting sands of the savannah when we were barefoot.
Yeah,
We're now running on pavements and asphalt and concrete and all sorts of surfaces. And I'm sure our ancestors weren't running on the surfaces we're running on. And I think as a consequence, you do that for long enough, you're going to pick up some overuse injuries.
yeah.
So I think, the guys and girls who, really live and breathe the barefoot movement, who run and jump and do all of the various things they do in their day-to-day lives and sports, I think it's almost like comparing apples and pears.
It is.
Our environment is completely different, and the demands on the body are completely different as a
Well,
result.
also as well because when you look at even modern day tribal people on the savannah, the ones that look at them, they run like gazelles. Yeah,
Yeah,
they look like gazelles as well. They're not
yeah,
like me, 5'7" knuckle draggers. Do you know
yeah,
what
yeah,
I mean? I mean, I could carry and lift shit all day long,
yeah,
but I don't run. I'm good. I'm good for a 10-second burst, and I can sprint, and I can probably tow a car at high speed for 10 seconds. But
yeah,
I
yeah,
couldn't run a fucking mile if my
yeah,
life depended on it.
yeah.
And even in my best days, I ran a mile and looked like somebody that shouldn't be running.
Yeah, I was much the same. I'm a 5'9" hobbit,
Yeah.
so I have a long torso and long arms and short legs, which makes me perfectly suited for deadlifting and squatting. But yeah, running it was never my thing.
Well, when I used to do a lot of surfing, my friends used to call me T-Rex. So that tells you everything you need to know about my arms. Yeah, there
Yeah.
you go. Because I couldn't get my surfboard under my arm, and I'd have to hold it out like that.
See,
To
my
my
friend, my training partner and coach he's six. I think he's 5'11", 6 foot. He's 6 foot. We'll call him 6 foot because he'll tell you he's 6 foot.
yeah,
And my arm span, my wingspan, my ape index is bigger than his ape index, and yet I'm probably at least 4 or 5 inches shorter than he is.
Yeah.
And I think this is the issue with anything that you kind of claiming works across a variety of different populations and a variety of different injuries. You have to take individual biomechanics and morphology into account. It's like back pain. If we look at like the different types of back pain that people experience, when we do research, I lectured for about 15 years, so I was a consumer and producer of research as well as lecturing up and coming physio students. And when you look at back pain research, back pain is simply classified as pain below the bottom of the 12th rib and the top of the pelvis. So if you have pain in that region, you have lower back pain. They don't try and differentiate between discogenic pain and facet joint pain and muscle strains and all that various stuff. So they throw some interventions at it, and some people get better and some people get worse and some people stay the same. But through the power of statistics, you can average that out to find out the one that's got the highest trend, the highest kind of, and then on that basis, we're changing protocols that have been used successfully for years and years and years. It's like core stability. Core stability came about in 1990. I think it was 1999. The San Francisco Spine Institute came out with this concept. I remember going to I did a guest lecture for a company called For Goodness Shakes, who used to have like a talented athlete program. And the head of British Swimming was there. And he was clearly a core stability advocate. And I remember I stood up in this lecture in front of all these impressionable young athletes, and me and him just almost like going at it. And he's saying, "Oh, core stability," and I was like, "It isn't the panacea that cures all else. It's not. Back pain isn't simply down to weak core or weak glutes. It's much more complicated than that."
I did a thing recently with she's actually a friend of mine. She's somebody I work with, but I've been doing some hypnosis with her, and her and I were talking. So just sort of quick reference. She has a celiac disease, and when I was talking to her, I was just like, "You're really anxious about that. I can't fix your celiac, but I can fix the anxiety." Ironically, now that she's pretty much relaxed and she has regular sessions sort of every couple of weeks to 4, anything from 2 to 6 weeks, right? Depending on my schedule and her schedule. She doesn't have any celiac symptoms anymore. Not because I've fixed anything, because I've lowered her stress down to 0. So there's nothing to react to.
100%.
We were talking one day about, I can't remember what we were just talking about. She goes, "Oh yeah," and her neck was a bit, I was like, "What's wrong with your neck?" She goes, "Oh, it's because I have a bad back. I'm due to go to the chiropractor." I was like, "How long have you been going to the chiropractor?" "Oh, I don't know.
20 years.
Yeah. And I was like, "Why?" And she goes, "Oh, I had an accident when I was 13. I got thrown off a horse." And she goes, "And I ended up in an ambulance. I was in traction for a couple of days, but it turned out I didn't break anything." I was like, "So nothing was broken?" She went, "No." I said, "There's nothing wrong with your back." I said, your brain keeps telling you something wrong with your back." She's like, I don't get it. And and it was the middle of summer. It was last year. And we both had like a glass of water, and we was in her house. And I said, "Hold that glass of water out." I said, "Now drop it on the carpet." She's like, "Why the fuck would I do that?" I said, "That's what your brain is doing your back all the time." And I said, "It's literally like, I'm not letting go of your back because you hurt it." And I said, and all I did was put it back under. I put it back under, had a conversation with her about when you were there at 13, you had an accident. You went in an ambulance, you went to hospital, you had x-rays, you've seen the specialists, nothing was broken, nothing was hurt. There is nothing wrong with your back. You're completely all right now. That was, I don't know, 8-9 months ago. She's never had a back problem since. And
so there's what you're talking about. I mean, this is I suppose it's not a new field of research, but it's a well-established field of pain research. So there's something called neuroplastic pain, or predictive coding, which essentially is where you get stuck in this pain loop. So your default setting when you perform certain movements is that your amygdala, which is your threat detection system in your brain, it perceives the last time we did this, this was the consequence. and it's almost like you develop a bad habit. So, yeah, I think psychotherapy, hypnotherapy, there's an app that we use called Curable, which is a bit like, it's a bit like called CBT for people with persistent pain. Because when people come to me and say, I've had back pain for 10 years, and I tell them, well, most injuries heal in 3 months, they'll go, well, how have I still got back pain then after 10 years if everything heals in 3 months? And I said, partly because of the deconditioning that takes place. So you stop doing certain things because you're frightened it's going to cause an exacerbation of your back pain. I says, but secondly, I said, because your brain perceives that that movement you did when your back went is a potential threat. And I said, until you've done something to address that, you will continue to loop in this kind of this predictive coding pattern.
And that's exactly what it is. And I'll just say to anyone listening as a caveat, I did check all of her medical history. You know what I mean? She was medically, it's like this has been going on for like since she was 13. So that can't be an injury because nobody's fixed it. So therefore it had to be a cognitive
the thing
issue.
with it, and I think a lot of injuries, I think that it would be naive to think that if you've had pain for more than 3 months, which is what's classed as chronic pain, it would be naive to think there aren't any changes in your brain that take place. I mean, if you look at when people have shoulder problems, their posture changes because the brain's trying to protect the shoulder. So you look at people's posture. When I was at uni, I was in uni in London, so I wasn't far from Waterloo Station. So on every break, I'd go to the coffee shop on Waterloo Station, and I'd just people watch. And I'd watch and move, and I'd think, right, what's up with his shoulder? What's up with her back? What's up with his leg? And when people talk about good and bad posture, I don't think there is a good or bad posture. I think there's good. The bad posture is posture that doesn't work for it hurts. But usually bad posture is a consequence of injury. I think we're not designed to be symmetrical. We're not designed, apart from the beautiful people in the world, like people, Brad Pitt, where you put a mirror down the face and they're symmetrical one side to the other. I think the vast majority of us are destined to be, ugly and asymmetrical. And I think I'm more concerned when I see somebody who's symmetrical, I'm more concerned by symmetry than I am asymmetry. Because I think asymmetry is a much more normal thing to happen.
Because I explain it to people. It's like, you remember that pub game, Jenga?
Yeah.
For every little injury or knock you've had, it's like pulling a little block out. But it doesn't fall down because your body is so adaptive. That's exactly what your brain's job is to do. It's like, oh, you've nicked this, you've nicked that. And you get all of these niggling injuries. And it might not look straight, but it's not going anywhere. It's solid.
Yeah. There's a concept called tensegrity. So if you think of the skeleton as like the tent poles of your tent, you think of the sheet that goes over the tent poles as your skin and your muscles and your fascia, and then you think of your guide ropes as the thing that holds the tent poles up. Well, essentially that's how your body's organised. So if we change the tension on one of those guide ropes, it pulls the tent in one direction or the other direction. It doesn't make the tent collapse. That would take something fairly catastrophic for those things to happen. So, the tent or tensegrity is a good analogy in terms of why we are able to do the things that we're able to do. With, in some of the situations I've worked in, some of the injuries that I've seen, it's a wonder people are even able to stand, and yet they continue to function because the brain is so good at adaptation.
Yeah, because, I mean, it's just rolling back, though. How did you get into this? Because you said you were in the army.
Yeah, so I was, I think I got into this. So I was a hyperactive kid. So I was a rebellious, hyperactive kid. So I got into sports when I was quite young. I was swimming for the county by the time I was 10. I won a national championship in cycling when I was about 15. But the thing that fascinated me about training wasn't so much the accolades that you get from winning a competition. It was the process. I was always very process driven. So I remember at 12, 13 years of age, I was reading Peak Performance magazine. This is before the internet, believe it or not, for people that are younger than us.
Yeah, we used to have these
we didn't
paper
have,
things. They're called magazines.
yeah, we used to
and
have
books.
to read paper.
Yeah.
I actually wrote my dissertation. I hand searched all of my journals for my dissertation. So I was reading what I could get my hands onto in terms of like training stuff, nutrition stuff. I was buying things like couscous from Holland and Barrett before it was available in the supermarket. And my dad was a typical working class Midlander, drove a lorry for a living, and he said, "What's that fucking muck you're eating there?" You know, it's like it was some poison. So at about the age of 19, I was cycling full time at that point, with aspirations of becoming a cyclist, a professional cyclist. Had a bad crash. I did lose my bottle. This was on a descent at 60 miles an hour, so I had some pretty nasty injuries. But if I'm honest with you, I'd lost my interest by that point. I'd achieved what I needed to achieve from that sport. I'd realised, I was arguing with my coach when I was 15, 16, why was I doing 6-hour bike rides? Why was I doing this? Because essentially it bore no relevance to my, to what I was doing as far as my racing was concerned. So I stopped cycling, and then I was at a bit of a loose end because I basically spent my time at school obsessing about training and obsessing about cycling rather than thinking about what I should be learning at school. So I joined the forces on a whim. I had no intention of joining the forces. In fact, my mom never spoke to me again after that because she was a pacifist, and I did something that was completely at odds with her moral compass.
What regiment did you join?
So I was in the Air Force. So I was a physical training instructor in the Air Force, and I spent my time breaking people, I suppose is the best way to describe it. So in basic training, you have, up to 90 recruits going through at one time, and there's probably 30 of them that graduate at the end of their basic training period. So part of my job was, breaking recruits. Part of my job was getting people ready to go out on special operations. Did a whole variety of lots of other things. And then I went to a place called Headley Court, which is in Box Hill in Surrey. Mm-hmm. That was back then the Tri-Service Rehabilitation Centre. So I started working as a rehabilitation instructor. And that was it for me. That was the, if you found, what is that? There's the expression, if you follow your passion, you'll never work a day in your life. And I realised that was my passion. And it allowed me to continue to obsess about training, because training, in my opinion, is rehab and rehab is training. There's no difference between the two. So went back to uni. I did a degree, my master's in osteopathy. So I did a osteopathic undergrad. And I chose osteopathy over physio because it was much more in depth in terms of the clinical reasoning, the diagnostics. And I think diagnostically, that's the starting point for every injury. If you can't diagnose an injury effectively, then what the fuck are you rehabbing? And I think that's where a lot of today's therapists struggle. People come and see me who've seen other people, and they say, "Oh, I've been told I've got a tight muscle." And I was like, well, a tight muscle isn't a diagnosis. That's a symptom of something that's else is going on. They don't know how to dig and ask those questions. So I did my degree. I realised doing my degree that I wasn't a complete moron, as I'd been told at school. Graduated, worked in pro cycling for about 5 years. So I was out in Europe with the Pro Continental team. Worked in America for a motor racing team. Came back to the UK, had some kids, went into lecturing when my kids were young because it was a regular 9 to 5 kind of hours, and then worked clinically around side the uni stuff. And then probably 5, 6 years ago, maybe even longer than that now, 6, 7 years ago, I realised that I was unfulfilled in my role as a lecturer, and that what I really wanted to get back to doing was doing what I loved doing way back in the late 90s, early 2000s. So we set up MoFo, me and Danielle set up MoFo, and it's kind of Well, it's done what I expected it to do. It's ruffled a few feathers, and I'm trying to change the way that I think rehab should be delivered and therapy should be delivered. Currently, single-handedly, but the tide is changing. The
You
tide
are
is
slowly
turning.
building up
Yeah,
colleagues that feel the same, aren't you?
yeah, absolutely. And I
There's a
think,
few of you now sort of coming out and saying there's a lot of bollocks out there and it has to stop.
yeah, and I think that's the problem. I think as a healthcare professional, people believe what you say. So you can make any old shit up. And unfortunately, it's like your GP. So you go into the GP and you say, "I've got backache," and he tells you in Latin, "You've got backache. Yes, you've got lumbago." But now you've got a diagnosis. He hasn't told you anything about what's causing your backache. He's just simply told you the same thing in Latin that you told him in English. And I think there is a danger that people are scuppered into thinking that this is going to fix their back problem or this is going to fix the knee problem, which invariably, involves some degree of hands-on treatment. And as useful as that is from a therapeutic perspective, if you think about the amount of load that your body is physically capable of withstanding, we're talking of thousands of pounds per square inch. Well, there's no way on this earth, no matter how big your therapist is and how good your pain tolerance is, either your therapist is going to be able to put that much pressure down onto your tissues, or you're going to be able to tolerate that pressure. And when I hear people saying, I've seen the chiropractor for 20 years, like you were talking about your friend earlier, I just think, well, after 4 or 5 sessions, you'd think, well, this isn't working. I'm going to say to that client, this isn't working, this isn't the approach I think you should be taking. Either that's because there's no connection between you two. I think rapport is very important in therapeutic relationships, or because it's something that isn't amenable to hands-on treatment. So slowly, as I've gained confidence I started off as a manual therapist, and I always included rehab as part of the treatment package. And as I've gained more confidence and more knowledge in my ability as a rehab sort of guy, I've now stopped practicing from a hands-on perspective, and I solely work from a rehab point of view. And my success rate is the same now as it was when I was doing hands-on and rehab without doing the hands-on stuff. It's 95% success rate generally.
It's crazy, isn't it? Because I think there's always a couple of things that go on here. Is we, by human nature, there is an element to a lot of people and I think we're all guilty of it to start with. It's only when we realised, like with hindsight, maybe there isn't a new gimmick. Maybe the body does know how to take care of itself. Maybe what I was actually chasing when I tried that newest, latest thing was, is there a way to get a 5-minute result rather than having to do 2 hours of rehab?
Absolutely.
And we're kind of always that quick fix thing, isn't it?
It's just quick fix society, aren't we?
Yeah. And we're always searching for that and not understanding that your ultimate goal should be, how do I remain as fit as I can be for as long as possible?
Yeah.
Because that can't include a quick fix solution. That becomes
absolutely.
a lifetime goal. Because so you and I have sort of had a little conversation in messages about stretching, because I used to have this crazy stretching routine, and I could literally at one point stretch for an hour a day. I've still never been able to do the splits.
Yeah.
All right. So, and people say, oh, there could be this, it could be that. Maybe I've just organically got tight hamstrings that are just like, you don't need to stretch any further than there. So you're never going to be allowed to do, I could never, within a week of stretching, I can pretty much get back to where I used to be when I used to do an hour a day.
Yeah.
It's never got past a certain point.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Even at my fittest.
Yeah.
The only thing I've ever been able to improve on is mobility drills and flexibility drills, where everything's involved, like some yoga poses, but again, I'm not a huge advocate for them. But it then taught me, after a long, long time, that stretching isn't the be all and end all for you. It might be great for someone else, but it doesn't work for you. And it then comes back to, right, can you still do the basics? Can you sit on your heels in a squat down position? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, actually, that's pretty good then.
Yeah.
Can you
Yeah.
hold
And
your hands above your
I
head?
agree.
Yeah.
I think the problem is with stretching. I think the problem with a lot of these kind of interventions that come out, stretching. That post I did on stretching, which gained, I think, a lot of haters.
Mm.
There was a lot of dialogue on there, so it succeeded in doing what I wanted it to do. It got some discourse, some discussion going. I do see more injuries from stretching than I do from people who lift weights. It was a statement of fact, or my experiential fact. And I think what I really don't understand. I mean, it's like Kelly Starrett, I think, started off the whole mobility kind of wad. He was using bands and balls
Was
and
that
stuff
How
like
to
this
Be
and
a
that.
Supple Leopard?
Yeah. He wrote the book Supple
I've got that
Leopard,
book.
and I think he's written several other books. And yeah, I bought that book back in the day, as I bought many other books in their time.
It's in the pile.
It's in the pile. I have read it. I've read most of the books that I've read. I have actually.
I have,
Bought,
yeah,
actually
I have read that book over the years. I have specifically gone through certain things, but yeah, I remember as soon as you said that name, I was like, didn't he do a really significant book that was there for a
and
while?
I think mobility has gained. Like, most people come to me now and they'll say, "Oh, can you just give me some mobility exercises to fix whatever this injury is that I've got?" And it usually isn't a mobility issue. The mobility issue has come around because their body's trying to protect them from going into the positions that the body doesn't want them to access because it's painful. But we've all become, obsessed about, like, banded this, banded that, mobility, mobilizing my hips, mobilizing. Have you got any mobility exercise for my back? And as I say to people, I think if you can hit your, as a power lifter, if you can squat to depth, if you can hit your shape in your deadlift, if you can get into position on your bench, your thoracic spine mobility is good enough to be able to create your arch on your bench, then you've got enough mobility to be able to perform your sport. And then I think when you add weight on top of that movement, so if you take a squat and you stick a bar on your back, and now you've got a weight pushing you into that hole, well, I can't see how that isn't improving mobility and, flexibility and all the other various things that banded things are supposed to do.
Well, I go back to our earlier conversation about people running on the savannah, and then there's Neanderthals. Right?
Yeah.
I don't ever remember a time in my life where I've been super flexible. Even when
No.
like every 90s, 80s and 90s teenager, I went from Bruce Lee to Jean-Claude Van Damme and all of that. So I was always doing, there's been reverse kicks, wheel
Trying to do the
kicks.
splits between the chairs.
Yeah, all of that.
Yeah.
And I was never super flexible. And when I used to
Yeah.
do kickboxing, when I did judo, when I did,
Yeah.
like every other kid, I chased around martial arts and bad aftershaves named after martial arts, right?
Hot karate.
Yeah, there we go. And
50p a bucket full. Yeah, I had plenty of that.
and you
Every
can still
Christmas I used
smell
to
it
get.
now. And it was last worn in '86.
Yeah, I used to get a gift set from my nan every
Yeah,
Christmas, a high karate gift set.
you can't beat it. Kids today will
Bless
never
her.
understand how
There was how
we
bad.
felt like a superhero.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
You
or
know?
Bruce. I remember nicking my dad's Bruce
Yeah.
from out the bathroom cabinet. But yeah,
I've
they'll
got a
never
friend who
realise how
still
bad it
swears
actually
by Bruce.
smelt in the
Oh,
80s.
yeah. But yeah, we would put on a bit of slap and dash, and you felt like a superhero and had the aura of something. And nothing filled a 1989 disco more than aftershave.
Yeah,
Vapor just floating out of the window, destroying the
yeah,
ozone layer. They're worried about
yeah.
climate change. You've got nothing on what
I
we've got
think
to
it
do.
was almost intoxicated was the
Yeah.
from the fumes of that. I did actually work with a guy. This was when I was in the forces. I worked with a guy who he was an alcoholic, and he got to the point where at the end of every month, when he'd run out of money,
Yeah.
he was drinking aftershave. He was drinking brutes and anything that had got a higher alcohol content. You can imagine he had no teeth and or anything that matter, stomach lining, But yeah, I think that probably is drain cleaner is probably the best place for that stuff.
But that's why we survived, because we slapped that stuff on and it killed everything, including your skin.
Yeah, yeah. There was no
No
such thing as
flus, no colds, no nothing.
exactly. Yeah,
But yeah, so like I said, the people, our biomechanics are different. We're all different shapes, we're all different sizes, lengths,
yeah,
and we all have different abilities. Some people are natural runners, some people are natural lifters. And you generally, as a general rule of thumb, if you're a natural runner, you're never going to be better than a guy that's a natural deadlifter. And the natural
yeah.
deadlifter's never going to outrun the savannah guy. So you can't then say, well, we should all be flexible, we should all be mobile. We should no. Your body has its own range of motion, and
And I think that those limitations are there. If you look at strength sports, one of the adaptive responses to people who lift weights is you get stiffer, because
yeah,
if you're stiffer, you can withstand more load. If you look at, I was doing a powerlifting, I was supporting a powerlifting meet, and there was a couple of physios down there who were working down there on the event. So I was down there with a couple of athletes, and they were telling people how bad it was that they couldn't hit depth with less than 100 kilos on the back. And I was like, well, I said, he's going to squat 350 kilos. I said, so he needs to be tight like a spring, because that's what he's going to use to get himself out of the hole and be able to stand up with that weight. And I think we assume that the adaptations that take place in response to strength training are negative adaptations. And I think they're specific adaptations to impose demands, in the same way as the office worker develops that round shoulder, round back position, because it's what the body's found a path of least resistance. It's the position that uses the least amount of energy.
well, I had a realization only Sunday. I haven't. I've got weights in my garden, and during lockdown and all of that, I've managed to collect more and more sort of thing. But I haven't actually done any serious weightlifting since the gyms were open in 2019
Yeah,
because I just wasn't able to. So most of my stuff has been burpees, press ups. As I said,
yeah, yeah.
fucking fucked ligaments in my elbows from too many pull ups and stuff. And I just thought, I haven't done a proper squat for a while. I haven't seen how much I could be prepared to squat on a 1 rep max
Yeah,
for at least 4 years. And I worked up to 140 kilos. And it's just
yeah,
like, well, I haven't done 140 kilos for 4 years. And then I thought,
yeah,
and I'd already worked out that morning. So I just went back out in the afternoon because it was playing on my mind. Can I still actually, what could I lift if I need to? And I probably could have done more. I was just like, that'll do. And then I thought, I'll see what I can deadlift. Yeah, and I managed a 170 kilogram deadlift. I haven't done a deadlift
yeah,
for 4 years. But
yeah. I think
I couldn't run down the road or jog
yeah,
for love or money. But
yeah.
I've always just had a sort of strength.
And I think strength is one of those things that you lose very, very slowly. I think, despite what people think, when people embark upon rehab programs with me, is all my muscle going to fall off? Am I going to, I'm going to end up in this like 9 stone mess? And they're actually incredibly surprised that they actually grow while they're rehabbing, because what I'm doing is I'm not just managing the load of their injury, I'm managing the load across all of the training sessions. So we're prioritizing recovery. And I think more importantly is they realize that actually hitting those top end weights all the time doesn't make you any stronger. Like, you can, as you identified, you can leave those top end weights alone for years and you can still come back and lift those, close on to those top end weights. Because what people fail to realize is that strength is as much a skill, as a neurological component to it, as there is a physiological component to it. So those pathways that you've developed through years of squatting, they're what you're firing up again, which is what allows you to bring 140 kilo squat for a 1 rep max after not squatting for 4 years.
Yeah, I mean, I was genuinely surprised. I mean, I don't know what my 1 rep max is, but that is close to what I used to do. I used to do that for a few reps, but I haven't done that for a few years. And the deadlift was probably about 35 kilos off my 1 rep max. I just didn't have any more. I don't think I could have lifted any more, to be fair. But I was just like, well, hang on a second, that was a lot closer than I was expecting to get.
And I would say with a few weeks of, I suppose, dusting off those neurological pathways, you would be back up to that, 35 kilo plus,
that's the thing
more
is,
on the deadlift.
the times when over the years when I've tried to go running, like, let's get some good cardio in, let's do some jogging. It doesn't matter how long I did it for, I was still shit. And
Yeah.
I never had massive increases. Like, oh, if my mile was a 8-minute mile, well, after 6 months of running, it was just a 7-minute 59-second mile. It just didn't change
Yeah, and I
anything.
think, and I think there's, I mean, I obviously I did a lot of running in the forces.
Yeah,
So I think my BFT, which is the mile and a half fitness test, I think it was 6:34 was my fastest time for a mile and a half. Now, I couldn't run anywhere near that speed now because I'm probably 30 kilos heavier, because I've spent the last probably 20 years engaged in strength sports. So, but I'm sure, if I dropped a few pounds and you changed your physiology, your load management, you'd probably find that running would become increasingly more comfortable. But I just think it's that whole paradigm, isn't it, where somebody's said running is the best thing to lose weight. So you see everybody out there now running, not because they enjoy running. I mean, that's the reason why we should do things, because it's good for us and we enjoy it. It's almost like a form of self-flagellation.
oh, it is definitely is. The amount of people I've said this. Oh, what do you recommend? Just go for a walk every day.
Yeah,
Oh yeah, but
yeah. I mean, I think,
but you hate exercise. Just
yeah,
put in your headphones, listen to some music, podcast, audiobook, go for a walk for an hour a day. You watch 2 hours of TV a night, so you can spare an hour a day to just walk every day.
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I think I use walking a lot with my clients as active recovery, because I think there's very little else that gets that kind of rhythmical rotation movement through the spine. Everything we do in the gym, everything we do in lots of sports is very linear.
Yeah.
And I think that little bit of rotation through the spine helps to decompress the joints, loosen off all the muscles, the paraspinal muscles, but more importantly, it gets the blood pumping around your body, which helps to eliminate the waste products you've produced during your training session.
The amount of people that won't believe me when I just say one of the if you're not naturally inclined to do sports, because you and I are lucky in the sense that even on a bad day, we would rather go to the gym and do something.
Yeah,
It's just how we are. So we're
yeah,
lucky in that sense. But if people, I understand when people don't like doing an exercise and don't like it, but it's just like the healthiest thing you can probably ever do as a human being is walk for an
yeah,
hour or two a day.
yeah.
Mental health, physical
And I would
health.
say, I think for a lot of people, the reason they don't like exercise is because a lot of people make out their exercise. If you watch a lot of these like bodybuilders and the kind of the PTs out there, what they try and do is destroy people. It's like they annihilate. They don't stimulate. So I think it's not surprising that people don't like the gym, because the gym is synonymous with pain and suffering and hard work, and actually, I think to create some degree of stimulation, to create an adaptation, it doesn't have to be that horrible, that much, that hell like. And I think again, you've got people like David Goggins, who's
just not on the planet.
Well, I genuinely think David Goggins is actually one of the most untogether motivational speakers I think I've actually ever heard. A man that has to be in perpetual motion, who can't stop, who's running on, essentially bone on bone because he's worn the cartilage down in his knees, yet he's unable to stop doing those things. I think that's not a man I'm going to listen to in terms of my mindset and motivational advice.
Well, have you listened to his book or read his book?
I have, yeah. I have, yeah.
As much as I respect him, and I genuinely do, he needs a therapist.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It's just like no. I completely admire his physical ability or his mental ability to ignore everything going on in his body. But I would not suggest anybody does that.
No, not at all. And I think I would almost say that perpetual motion stops him from having to face his demons. I think he's running away from something. Yeah, he's running away from something. And I think the strong people, if you look at people like, I don't know, Jocko Willink, those sort of people, that guy will probably happily sit and talk to his demons and spend an hour in conversation with them, not feeling the need to get up and start running. And yet we aspire to be like, Goggins, who's
There's a
like
wonderful clip with Cameron Hayes where he talked about going out running with David Goggins or something. I can't remember. They got split up or something, and David Goggins was ahead of him in the hill, and they said, "Oh, have you seen?" When they caught up, they said, "Oh, have you seen him?" And this guy's like, "Yeah, yeah." And they said, "What was he doing?" He's like, "Well, he had his shirt off," and he was like, "They don't fucking know me. They can't fucking touch me. They can't." It's like, right, the guy's not the full ticket, is he? Do you know what I mean? If he wasn't a Navy SEAL, he'd have been sectioned.
Yeah, and I think it's funny, isn't it, how despite all those things, he's still someone that's revered and someone that's looked up to as an inspiration, as a role model. And yes, I love training. I love sport. It's something I've always done. It's part of who I am, part of my DNA. But I think it's equally important you're as comfortable sitting quietly,
definitely,
in your own head as it is that you're busy and you're active and you're doing all those things there. You have to have that balance, I think. And for me, he doesn't have that balance.
No, definitely not. Just quickly, because I'm conscious of taking up too much of your time. We're just going to run through a couple of more things that are on my list.
Yeah,
two of them we'll put together: scraping and cupping.
Yeah. What are my thoughts? So cupping. I mean, I think cupping is it's a counter irritant. So the best way to describe cupping is if I put something tight on your skin, when I take that something that's tight off your skin and muscle and superficial fascia feels looser. Is it changing the length of fascia? I don't know, because I think if fascia was that easily manipulated, if we go back to our tent analogy, if we could change the pliability of the tent material that easily, that tent would collapse. So I think fascia has to have a degree of tensile strength. And can we, I mean, certainly in things like the IT band, which is another sort of classic area that people get the foam rollers out and roll, they've done some cadaveric experiments where they've taken the IT band out of a body and they've suspended 1,000-pound weight off the end of the IT band. And when it stretched a millimetre, and when they took the 1,000-pound weight off, it sprung back to its pre-stretch length. It made no difference in the length. Now, I'm sure people will probably say, well, yeah, it's dead tissue. It's not biological tissue. It's not got a blood supply. It's not got this. But I do think that if it was that easy to manipulate the fascia and the soft tissues, then when we put 180 kilos, 200 kilos on our back, we'd just collapse into a pool of jelly, essentially.
I put it down to a placebo.
Yeah, I think, and you know what? I think people talk about placebo like it's a negative thing. I think there's a lot of good to be done if you can induce a placebo effect in people. I think there's a powerful physiological effect. So Zubietta did some research into the physiological effects of placebo and demonstrated that you could actually measure, if somebody thought something, you could measure the physiological effects of that thought process.
Hypnotherapy. All we're doing is accessing your subconscious and having a conversation with it. It's all we're doing is this is how you think. This is how you should be thinking. And so for me, when I say like the placebo, I don't think people appreciate how powerful that is. You can listen to some of the world's best athletes and ask them, do you have a routine? Do you have a superstition? Yeah, I do. And they do that between Nadal's the one that's just popped into my head, the way he must bounce the ball X amount of times.
Yeah.
And if it's out of sequence, he has to start again. Because if he doesn't do that, his brain will not hit the serve the way he wants to.
Yeah.
So
100%.
That routine that goes in your brain, that placebo, that superstition, that's all the same to me, is just the way that you comprehend how something's going to be done.
They're rituals, aren't they? They're
habits, rituals, routines.
Yeah.
It's there, and you do that, and it's the most powerful cognitive thing you can do. But that's CBT, NLP. They're all off that. This is the way you think. This is the way you talk to yourself. This is the way you believe.
Yeah.
So that's where I think they work.
Yeah. And I think with, cupping, I heard someone say the other day, it draws toxins. When you put them onto the back, it draws toxins to the surface. And I sat there and thought to myself, so what does the liver do then? So if you've got, A, why have you got toxins just in your back? And B, what the fuck is the liver doing while you're cupping and doing all the stuff on there? I mean, that's what your liver is. It's a detoxification unit. So, and then ISTM,
and the lymphatic system. Is it? Yeah, the lymphatic
system. Yeah, absolutely. It's the lymphatic system. Yeah. So everything drains, all your interstitial, all the products of inflammation drain into the lymphatic system. There's filters in the lymphatic system which get rid of, foreign bodies, bacteria, viruses. So lymph nodes. So when your glands are swollen, back in the day where your nan used to say, your glands are swollen, and she'd feel your neck. Yeah. They're lymphatic nodes. They're filters that are basically stopping the passage of whatever it is that you've been invaded by. Tool-assisted massage, I think used in the right context, it's a nice way to access areas with your hands that are hard to access with your hands. I think it's more about ease of access of areas than it is what you're actually doing. And what I take umbrance at with tool-assisted massage is when people come in and see me and they show me pictures of the back, and it's like they've got third-degree burns. And I'm like, what was that? And they were like, oh, it was some tool-assisted massage. Is it normal not to be able to sleep on my back for 3 days after I've had that treatment? And I was like, no, it's not fucking normal. And I said, and just think of the impact that has on your recovery. If you're using this as a recovery tool, just think of the impact that has on your recovery. So I think everything has its place. I think just like we talked about earlier, some people will get a lot from cupping. Some people will get very little from cupping. I think some of that is dependent upon your belief system and your rituals and your routines and what you think is going to work. But I think in terms of the actual hard science, the jury's out, and I don't think it's doing what people think it's doing. It's certainly not breaking down scar tissue. I don't think it's releasing fascial adhesions, as people suggest it is, because I don't think fascia is that weak that a suction cup could change the integrity of that particular part of the structure. Because if it was, we'd be in all sorts of trouble when we were trying to lift, big heavy weights over our head or on our backs.
I think the most it can do on a physical level is it makes you feel relaxed. And if it makes you feel relaxed, that's brilliant.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot to be said for the therapeutic effect of treatments in terms of that relaxation. So if we look at, modern day life is we're in a stress response most of the time, aren't we? We're in a fight or flight response. Yeah. And healing doesn't take place, recovery doesn't take place when we're in fight or flight, because you're not thinking about repairing that injury when you're in your brain. You're thinking about fighting the dinosaur or running away from the dinosaur, which is essentially where you are. So if we can cultivate the parasympathetic part, if we can cultivate that parasympathetic part of their nervous system, which is where all your housekeeping functions are taking place, again, I think there's a huge amount of power in that.
Yeah, I do. Strongly recommend it to everybody.
Yeah. So treatment for me has always been about creating as much of a parasympathetic environment as I possibly can do. People used to come in. I worked with one of my clients is a behavioural neuroscientist, absolutely fascinating woman. And she did like an audit of my building, and she said, right, you need some plants in here. You need to play this sort of music, and you need to play this kind of this. So we did some videos. So when people turned up to the clinic, there was a video that showed them where to park, and we did a video that showed them where to go and what would happen. Because she said, the more you can get people into a parasympathetic nervous system state, the more effective your treatment's going to be. So by the time they walked in through the door, it was like they already knew me. So there was no, kind of awkwardness or, any issues in terms of like rapport developments. And then once you start treating, because I'm not beating the shit out of people, I'm trying to relax things down and loosen things off, working with them as opposed to through them. I was always surprised by, when they stood up, they were like, oh my God, I feel absolutely exhausted, because you've gone into a deep state of relaxation. You've gone into that sort of parasympathetic part of your nervous system.
I do a thing in hypnosis with people where I take them to the world's most comfortable, snuggly, relaxing, calming chair.
Yeah.
And they all come out of it afterwards and they're like, I didn't know you could feel this relaxed. And I was just like, no, this is the first time you've ever been relaxed.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
It's just the same. You just fall comfortably, nicely, calmly, sinking deeply into the world's most comfortable, relaxing, snuggly, calming, relaxing chair. And they're like, oh, fucking. And honestly, it's my number one treatment.
Yeah.
And then people come to me if they're just, I feel so good afterwards. Yeah, you're just relaxed. It's that simple. You walk around on a scale of 1 to 10. Everybody is probably walking around at 5. But you don't realise how stressed you are. And then by the time you get to the end of the day, you've had a shit time trying to get to work. You couldn't park. Your boss has been a dickhead. And then you get home and one of the kids hasn't done their homework or ripped their school uniform or fucking dropped a school trip on you. You go to bed at 10. Right, but you've got no escape. You've got nowhere to go. So you just go to bed feeling really irritated, and then you wake up. You're probably at 6 and 7 still. As soon as you've woken up, all I've done is reset you to 0.
And I think the other problem with that is that on top of all that stuff, people are throwing another load of stress on themselves when they go to the gym. And they're doing their progressive overload, and they're training to failure, and they're creating all this tissue damage on an internal environment that isn't geared towards fixing that tissue damage. And I think when I talk about training to failure and progressive overload, I think the current paradigm in the fitness industry accounts for 90% of the reason why most people are injured. Because you can't add weight week after week after week. Strength isn't linear. As we've discussed, there's a big neurological component to strength. So part of getting stronger is developing those neurological pathways. Well, you can't do that under a heavy load because your body's thinking, fuck, this is heavy, rather than thinking about your cues for your squat or your deadlift. I think we then take recovery for granted. We expect, well, I'm not training now, therefore my body's recovering. But as you quite rightly said, if you're walking around at a 5 out of 10 on a stress scale, well, you're not recovering. You're still in fight or flight. And then we had a few pre-workouts in, which pushes even higher into that fight or flight. We had some coffee in and some stimulants, and before you know it, you're at 8 or 9. Never mind 5 or 6.
Well, I reckon most people, if they've just had all of the things that we discussed, they go to bed at 10, will wake up tomorrow at 6 and 7, and they've not had breakfast yet. And, and then, like I said, and the kid's like, oh, Mum, where's my PE kit? Oh, Dad, are you giving me a lift today? And suddenly they're walking out the door at 8. And if you don't get a good few days of nothing happening to you, that won't go down. And all I'm doing is resetting people to a 0.
Yeah, 100%.
And that's the benefit that they feel. That miracle they think of a cured is nothing.
And I think that's what good therapy should be. I think it should be a way of accessing their parasympathetic nervous system to give them a reset back to 0. I don't think it's about fixing injuries and hurting people and doing all the things that I see people using manual therapy for. I see it as a therapeutic opportunity to get somebody from a 6 or 7 out of 10 on that stress scale down to a 2 or 3 out of 10, and actually demonstrate to them, oh, this is what relaxation feels like. This is what it should feel like when I'm relaxed.
Yeah, it is. I still do it occasionally. I'll say to people as a test, can you give me 5 symptoms when you know you're stressed or under the weather? And then they'll give me a list. And then I'll say,
Yeah,
how do you know what your body's going through when you feel happy?
and they've got no idea.
They
Yeah,
haven't got a clue. They
yeah,
don't even know
yeah,
the first symptom, first awareness of their body when their body is happy. It's like, well, now you know
yeah,
your problem. You don't know when you're
yeah,
happy. You don't know when you're
yeah.
relaxed. You know. So,
And
my,
I think, unfortunately, I think, again, it's we're the last of the Generation X kind
mm,
of kids, aren't we? I do look at, I've got two kids of my own, 3 step kids, and I do look at their environment in comparison to the way we grew up, and do think that a lot of the issues that arise, mental health issues, arise because of what they're viewing and seeing
yeah,
as normal. If you talk about mental health, I think my last few years of lecturing, the instances of mental health issues amongst students rose exponentially. Like in the last 5 years before I gave up, and I don't think that was in any way, shape, or form linked to a massive changes in the stress levels of society. I think it was because we started talking about it more, and it became more of a topic of social acceptance. Um, ADHD, ADHD has become the fanboy now. Everybody's got
yeah.
ADHD, and their bad behaviour isn't because they're actually behaving badly. It's because they've got attention deficit disorder.
Yeah, because you and I would have gone outside, built a ramp with our mates, and gone flying off it on a bike. And at some point
Absolutely,
during that
yeah, yeah,
afternoon, we'd have fallen
yeah,
off it,
yeah,
and we'd have had shitloads of adrenaline getting dumped every time we cycled along
yeah,
like nutters, thinking we were going super fast.
yeah,
And you would hit that board for the first time, and if you were lucky, you had a solid piece of plywood. If you didn't, it
yeah,
would bend in the middle, and you were
yeah.
fucked because you were
And then
about
you're
to
over the
fly.
handlebars, yeah, front teeth
So,
into
yeah,
the tarmac.
right. And that did a lot to raise your adrenaline and dump it. Natural cycles that you should have growing up, sort of thing, as we would have once upon a time running around. But we also learned to be bored.
Yeah,
There was a value to being bored, and the
yeah,
thing about being
absolutely.
bored is it encouraged you to do sort of long procedure type activities. Like getting your mates together to build a ramp. You had to go and find materials. You had to go and rob stuff out of your
Yeah,
dad's garage. You
yeah,
had to gather together. But you might also, just because somebody knew where there was a tree swing, but it was a 45-minute walk away.
yeah,
Well, let's go there just so we can see if this swing is any good on this tree.
yeah, yeah,
Because you
yeah,
had
yeah,
nothing else to do.
yeah,
So you
yeah,
become creative with your boredom.
yeah, yeah. And I think boredom's, in the forces. I think a lot of people think the forces is you're on the go all the time. There's long periods of time where it's a case of hurry up and stand still. You get tooled up, ready to go out and do something, and then you sit in a hangar for 3 or 4 hours.
Yeah.
Whiling away the hours by however you want to while away the hours, playing cards or chatting or doing whatever. But yeah, I just think we've lost those fundamental key skills that I think make it easier to survive in
Yeah.
today's society.
So the last one I've got for you is, because you were the first person I seen kick back on this. That's hot versus cold compressed, where people are like, you sprain your ankle, make it cold. No, no, no.
Yeah,
Let it do its thing.
yeah,
And you were the
yeah,
first therapist I seen kick back on this, because I don't know. I've always known this, and I don't know where I knew it from. Do you know what I mean? I think it's just one of those, probably from being around head injuries and stuff. You learn to just let the body repair itself.
yeah,
And you were the first therapist I've seen kick back and say, no, the body knows what it's doing. Let it do its thing.
yeah. So I think A.T. Still, the founder of osteopathy. Now, this is back in the 1800s. This was around about the same time as Louis Pasteur came up with the germ theory and antibiotics. He came up with some osteopathic tenets, so some guidelines. And one of them was the body has its own medicine chest. Now, this was way before we knew what the immune system did. This was way before we understood the white blood cells and all the different types of white blood cells and all the functions those white blood cells have. And I just think it's like, if if you look at what inflammation is there for, so there's a cellular and a vascular cascade. So the cellular cascade is designed to get white blood cells into the area because it needs to either clean up the wound site if you've got a wound, or it needs to clean up the edges of the muscle if you've torn a muscle. Now, in order to get the cells there, because these cells are quite big, your blood vessels, so the vascular cascade, your blood vessels have to get bigger, so they have to vasodilate. And to let the blood cells out of the blood vessels, they have to become more permeable. So the pores in the membranes of the blood vessels have to get bigger. So the body produces a number of chemicals. Histamine's one of them. So the thing that causes hay fever is produced when you go through an inflammatory response, because it makes your eyes run, it makes your nose run. So what you're doing is washing away the irritants. Yeah. Same as what your body's trying to do inside. So we come along and we go, right, let's put some ice on it then, because it might swell uncontrollably. And what does ice do? It does the opposite. It closes your blood vessels down. It makes them less permeable. So now you've got a situation where you've got stasis and you've got all of this, all the junk still in there, and none of the good stuff, none of the white blood cells, the things that are going to start the repair process. You've got all those things kind of backing up, waiting to get into the area. And I think, as I used to say to students, it's like, if we've been on the earth for, evolution and creation, I suppose, is a debate for another day. But if we've evolved and we've been on the planet for a few million years, do you honestly think by this point in our evolution, the body makes a mistake by creating inflammation? I don't think it does. And I think the reason why it's still perpetuated is because there's $1 million industry being created out of ice and cryotherapy and cryocuffs and game readies and all the various devices that we use to cool and compress. Compression, I think, is different. I think compressing a joint, because it increases hydrostatic pressure, pushes those big blood cells into the area, and it pushes inflammation back into the lymphatic system. So I'm not averse to compression, but ice, I just think, I'm not sure. Apart from in the first early stages of bleeding, when you're trying to create a clot, I don't think there's any need for ice. I think you let the body do what it's going to do, and you just, go with it. The reason we want to control things is because we want that quick fix. We want to get back to work. We want to get back to the gym. We want to get back to... So we don't want to take the time it takes for the things to heal normally.
So where do you sit with ice baths?
I think there's a recovery strategy. I like ice baths, but they have to be, the timing has to be right. If they're done too close to a training window, you essentially blunt some of the inflammatory effects of training. Yeah. So there's a potential that you're not maximizing the effects of what you've done in that training session. There's a lot of good stuff coming out about norepinephrine. So ice baths produce a happy hormone called norepinephrine. So norepinephrine is a pain reliever, and it's also a bit like serotonin. It boosts mood. So I do think there's merit in ice baths.
I like them from the pushing yourself out of a comfort zone.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's exactly what I was going to say. When you talked about David Goggins earlier, so during lockdown, I bought a deep paddling pool, and I basically filled it with water. Now, although I worked all the way through lockdown because we were classed as healthcare practitioners, every morning I had an ice bath, and I'd listen to David Goggins while I was sat in the ice bath. And it was, I think, the single biggest thing it did for me, it was the ability to be able to do something that every part of my body went, I don't want to do that. The mental, it was like, no, I'm not doing that today. I'm not getting in that pool. And I'd get in there anyway. So mentally, incredible. I think I agree. I think
mentally it's one of the best things you can do.
Yeah.
I've seen some stuff lately, but nothing I can verify, where and I've seen it on a Joe Rogan clip to start with, but I've seen other people talking about it now. But it could just be a trend without any real science behind it. People having a nice bath before training.
Yeah, and I don't know why. Yeah, I'm not sure what the rationale would behind that.
No.
To be honest with you,
No.
Again, if we're preparing for, to participate in a sport where we need elasticity and pliability and sliding surfaces sliding across each other, I don't know why we would be ice bathing before, because it's surely having exactly the opposite effect.
I looked at it is it one of those things where, and I'm literally just chucking darts at an open wall. Is it one of those things where you jump in an ice bath and there's that cognitive
Yeah,
sort of
that kind
just
of,
startles you,
yeah,
and it brings you
yeah,
like, shit, stuff is about to happen. And
yeah,
then where literally all of that blood is going to go into your main organs, then you get out half an hour later, you're doing a warm up on a treadmill. Have you somehow maybe reduced any inflammation that you may have picked up overnight, maybe flushed out a load of toxins, but you are now about to pump in loads of fresh blood into your muscles as long as you're warming up properly? I thought
yeah, yeah,
maybe there's a
possibly,
tangible
yeah,
result,
yeah.
but I could also be grasping a big handful of straws.
And I think, ultimately, as we've said before, all of these things they're nice if you've got access to them.
Yeah.
But I think, don't underestimate the importance of sleep in terms of recovery, and don't underestimate the importance of walking. And that neither of those two things cost anything.
No, they don't. No. So I'm going to finish, because that's a great place to stop. So I'm going to finish with one last random question.
Yeah.
If you could be anywhere at any time ever, so what would you be driving? Where would you be? And what music would you be listening to?
Wow. I think it'd be the 1960s.
Yeah.
I think I would be driving maybe a Ford Mustang,
Nice.
like in Bullet.
Yeah.
Music wise, God, there were so many good bands back in those days. It would probably be Bob Dylan, I think, probably.
Oh, nice.
Or depending what mood, or Pink Floyd, maybe back even that sort of era.
And where would you be?
I want to say San Francisco for some reason. That's maybe because I think Bullet was filmed in San Francisco,
wasn't it? Because there's that
so maybe I'm
scene
just
where he comes over.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, so maybe I'm just pulling that up. But America, I think, somewhere.
Yeah, nice. Thank you. Really appreciate that.
Cool.